The night the temperature dropped to *-35 F, the valley went silent. Snow packed the forest so tightly that even the creek froze in mid-murmur. At the edge of the trees stood Elias Ward's cabin. No smoke, no chimney, no sign of heat. Neighbors had warned him for years. You won't last one winter like this. Yet that night, Elias slept. The cabin was small, squared from rough pine, half buried into a south-facing slope. From the outside, it looked unfinished, almost abandoned. Inside, there was no stove, no fireplace, no propane heater humming in the corner. Just wood, earth, and a man who understood cold better than fear. Elias didn't build up like most cabins. He built into the land. 3 walls were packed with earth, layered with stone and clay, then sealed with timber. The roof was low and heavy, insulated with sawdust and packed snow. Windows were small, double-layered, and faced the winter sun. There was no chimney because there was no fire. Fire, Elias believed, was unreliable. It needed fuel. It needed tending. It left traces. Instead, he designed the cabin to keep heat rather than make it. The neighbors didn't understand that difference. When Elias didn't show up to help clear the access road after the storm, people noticed. By the second morning, concern turned into certainty. At *-35 F, even well-equipped homes struggled. A man alone in a stove-less cabin should have been frozen solid. 3 neighbors snowshoed out to the tree line. The cabin door was buried halfway up. They knocked. No answer. They forced the door open. Warm air spilled out. Elias sat at a rough wooden table, hands wrapped around mug. No gloves. No coat. His breath didn't fog the room. Frost coated the doorframe behind them, but inside, the air hovered well above freezing. The neighbors stared, scanning the walls for a hidden stove, a flue, something. There was nothing. No ash. No soot. No smell of smoke. "How are you alive?" one of them asked. Elias looked up calmly. The cabin never let the heat leave. Elias explained it simply. Body heat. Thermal mass. Insulation thick enough to stop loss, not just slow it. The earth walls absorbed warmth during the day and released it slowly at night. Snow on the roof acted as insulation. Even the door was layered. Felt wood again. He cooked during daylight, when the cabin could be vented without losing stored warmth. At night, he sealed everything tight and let the structure do the work. The neighbors left shaken, their breath freezing the moment they stepped outside. They told the town one thing on the way back. He survived without a stove, and the cold never touched him. By afternoon, the story had outrun the storm. At the general store, people repeated the same sentence in disbelief. No stove. No chimney. And he was warm. Some laughed it off. Others shook their heads, calling it luck. But a few listened carefully. Old-timers remembered half-buried root cellars that never froze. Hunters recalled snow, caves that trapped warmth better than tents. Elias hadn't invented something new. He had remembered something old. 2 days later, more neighbors returned, this time with questions instead of fear. Elias let them in one by one. They touched the walls, thick and cold on the outside, faintly warm on the inside. They pressed palms to the floor, packed earth beneath with planks. No hidden heaters. No tricks. Every seam was sealed. Every corner intentional. The cabin felt still, like it wasn't fighting the cold, just ignoring it. "This place doesn't make heat," someone said quietly. "It keeps it," Elias replied. That night, Elias showed them what happened after sunset. He closed the shutters early, locking the day's warmth inside. He moved slowly, deliberately, conserving energy. A heavy wool blanket stayed folded, rarely needed. As the temperature plunged outside, the cabin changed almost imperceptibly. The walls released what they had stored. The air stayed calm. No drafts. No crackling fire demanding attention. While other homes burned wood all night, Elias slept through the coldest hours. Not everyone believed. A few accused Elias of exaggeration. Others said it couldn't work long-term. Elias didn't argue. He never had. He simply lived the way he had planned, quietly and consistently. When another cold snap hit a week later, colder than the first, no one came to check on him. They already knew. By midwinter, the cabin had become a reference point. People didn't ask if Elias would survive anymore. They asked how much would they could save, how to seal drafts better, whether snow on a roof was really insulation. Elias answered when asked. He never preached. Outside, the valley stayed locked in ice. Inside the cabin, time slowed, steady and warm, without flame or smoke to mark its passing. Late January brought a freeze unlike the first. Wind howled through the valley, stripping warmth from houses that relied on constant fire. Chimneys clogged with ice. Woodpiles shrank fast. A few families crowded into single rooms, feeding stoves through the night. Elias noticed the change only by the light. The sun rose lower, weaker. He adjusted the shutters, opening them longer during midday, closing them earlier at dusk. The cabin absorbed what little heat the sky offered and held it quietly. One morning, dark smoke hung over the valley. A chimney fire had forced a family out into the cold before dawn. Neighbors gathered, offering space, blankets, anything with heat. Someone glanced toward the tree line. "He doesn't even have a stove," a man said. "Exactly," another replied. That night, the displaced family slept on Elias's floor, shocked by the calm warmth inside a cabin that burned nothing at all. Elias didn't explain much. He showed instead. He pointed to wall thickness, to packed earth, to layers built slowly over time. He showed where cold usually sneaks in, and how every joint was sealed. "Cold isn't loud," he said. "It slips." The cabin wasn't strong because it resisted winter. It was strong because winter had nowhere to enter. By February, habits in the valley began to change. People stopped shoveling snow off roofs. Drafty doors were rebuilt. Storage rooms were moved underground. Heat was treated like something precious, not something endless. Elias watched the changes from a distance. He had never meant to start anything. Survival, to him, was personal, not a statement. But the cold had a way of teaching publicly. During the coldest week of the year, when the temperature never climbed above zero, Elias's cabin became the quiet center of the valley. Not a shelter, not a refuge, just proof. Proof that fire wasn't the only answer. Proof that warmth could be designed, not fought for. Proof that at -35 F, the right structure mattered more than flames. Outside, the wind scoured the trees bare. Inside, the cabin held steady. By early March, the cold finally softened its grip. Days grew longer. Snow still ruled the valley, but no longer threatened to kill by exposure alone. People stepped outside without panic, listening for drips instead of cracks. Elias noticed the change in the walls. They released warmth faster now, no longer rationing it through endless nights. The cabin felt almost generous. Winter had stopped testing it. With danger fading, curiosity replaced fear. Neighbors visited not to survive, but to understand. They asked about materials, angles, depth, and mistakes to avoid. Elias spoke more openly now. He explained how long it took to build properly, how shortcuts always failed, and how patience mattered more than strength. "This place works," he said, because it was slow. As snow melted, the cabin revealed its full shape. Earth-packed walls blended into the hillside. Drainage channels guided meltwater away. Nothing sagged, nothing cracked. While other cabins showed damage, warped frames, split beams, Elias's looked untouched, as if winter had passed over it instead of through it. The neighbors took note. Spring meetings in the valley sounded different. People talked less about bigger stoves and more about better walls. New cabins were planned lower, tighter, smarter. Firewood was still gathered, but no longer worshipped. Elias listened quietly from the back of the room. He had never tried to change the valley. Winter had done that for him. When the last snow finally disappeared, Elias opened the cabin fully. Cool air flowed through, refreshing instead of threatening. The walls rested, ready for another cycle. He stepped outside and looked back once. No chimney, no smoke, no proof of struggle. Just a cabin that had held warmth when it mattered most. Summer arrived quietly, without ceremony. The valley warmed, then baked. Cabins that had struggled to stay warm now struggled to stay cool. Windows stayed open day and night. Fans hummed constantly. Elias closed his door. The same earth-packed walls that held heat in winter now held it out. The cabin stayed cool and dim, untouched by the harsh afternoon sun. While others chased shade, Elias worked inside, comfortable and steady. The design had never been about winter alone. Word traveled farther than Elias expected. By late summer, strangers arrived, builders, off-grid enthusiasts, people tired of burning fuel just to feel safe. They asked to see the cabin. Some took notes. Others just stood quietly, absorbing the calm of the space. Elias answered what he could. This isn't a trick, he told them. It's respect for the climate. As seasons turned again, Elias reflected on what the cabin had never required. No fuel deliveries, no emergency repairs, no constant maintenance to survive extremes. It demanded only awareness of sun, wind, soil, and timing. The cabin didn't conquer nature. It cooperated with it. When the first snow returned, no one worried about Elias. In fact, no one checked on him at all. The valley had learned its lesson. Smoke rose again from chimneys, but less desperately. Cabins were quieter now, better sealed, more thoughtful. Elias closed his shutters and let the walls begin their work once more. On the coldest night of the new winter, the temperature dropped again. Not as low as before, but close enough to remind everyone. Elias sat at his table, the cabin still and warm, untouched by flame or smoke. Outside, the valley endured winter as it always had. Inside, nothing had changed. Warmth, Elias knew, wasn't something you burned for. It was something you built. Years later, people still told the story, though details shifted with each retelling. Some said the cold was worse. Others said the cabin was smaller. What never changed was the disbelief. No stove, no chimney, still warm. The story stayed because it challenged what everyone thought they needed to survive. Elias never claimed brilliance. He never called himself an innovator. When asked what made the difference, he always returned to the same idea. Most homes try to win against the weather, he said. This one just refuses to leak. There was no heroism in his voice, just certainty. New cabins appeared over time, half set into hillsides, built tighter and lower than before. Children grew up thinking thick walls and sealed doors were normal. Fewer chimneys marked the skyline. Elias watched this quietly, knowing his cabin was no longer unusual. That, to him, meant it had worked. One late afternoon, years after that first brutal winter, Elias sat outside and listened to the wind move through the trees. The cabin behind him stood unchanged, patient as ever. It didn't need praise. It didn't need explanation. It had done its job. Long after that winter was forgotten, long after the cold had passed into memory, one truth remained in the valley. Survival wasn't about fighting nature harder. It was about understanding it better. And in a place where fire once meant life, one quiet cabin proved that warmth could exist without flame. People who studied the cabin closely noticed details that photos never captured. The soil type mattered. The slope angle mattered. Even where footsteps compacted snow around the walls changed how cold behaved. Elias had learned these things by paying attention, not by following plans. The land tells you what it wants, he said. You just have to stop arguing with it. Some tried to copy the cabin board for board. Most failed. Their versions leaked warmth or trapped moisture. Elias explained why copying never worked. This place fits here, he said, tapping the ground. Move it, and it becomes something else. The idea wasn't the cabin itself. It was adaptation. Eventually, a small crew arrived with cameras. They filmed in silence, careful not to disrupt the calm of the space. No dramatic lighting, no staged moments, just a quiet room that stayed warm when logic said it shouldn't. When the footage aired, viewers focused on what was missing. No stove, no chimney, no smoke. Many who watched assumed the cabin was the point. Elias knew better. The real lesson wasn't buried walls or sealed doors. It was restraint, knowing when not to build bigger, knowing when not to add more, knowing when enough was truly enough. In a world obsessed with output and consumption, the cabin stood as something rare, a structure that asked almost nothing in return. No fuel, no urgency, no constant attention. It simply worked, quietly, patiently, season after season. Time moved differently around the cabin. Seasons turned, winters came and went, and Elias aged with the land. His steps slowed, but the routine never changed. He still opened the shutters to the sun. He still sealed them before dusk. The cabin required no strength, only awareness. While other homes needed constant fixing, Elias's cabin asked for almost nothing. He checked seals. He cleared drainage paths. He replaced nothing that didn't fail, because it had been built to endure, not to impress. The cabin aged gracefully, like something meant to stay. As Elias grew older, visitors asked one question more than any other. What happens when you're gone? Elias always smiled. He never answered directly. He would just look at the walls, the earth, the slope outside. This place knows how to take care of itself, he finally said. One winter returned with a familiar bite. Temperatures plunged again, close to that first infamous storm. The valley prepared calmly this time. Homes were tighter. Wood piles lasted longer. No one worried about the cabin. They trusted it more than any chimney. On the coldest night of that winter, long after Elias had gone to bed, the cabin remained unchanged. No sound of fire, no glow of flame, just steady warmth held by earth and time. Outside, the wind tested everything it could. The cabin did not respond. When Elias was gone, the cabin remained exactly as it had been. No one rushed to change it. No one added a stove just in case. The valley understood now that altering it would mean misunderstanding it. The door stayed closed. The shutters followed the sun. The walls kept their quiet work. People still visited, but differently. They spoke less inside the cabin. They noticed how sound softened, how temperature stayed even, how nothing demanded attention. It felt less like a building and more like a lesson you entered. The cabin didn't explain itself. It waited to be understood. Years later, another extreme winter arrived. Headlines warned of record lows. Pipes froze. Power failed. Firewood vanished fast. And once again, someone remembered the cabin. They opened the door and felt it immediately. The same steady warmth, unchanged, untouched by panic or fuel shortages. This time, there was no disbelief, no shock, just quiet confirmation. The valley had learned that survival wasn't louder tools or hotter fires. It was foresight. It was humility. It was building in a way that didn't need heroics later. Elias had taught that without ever teaching. Long after the storms passed and the cold became just another story, the cabin stayed where it always had, set into the land, patient and unremarkable. No stove, no chimney, no smoke against the winter sky, just warmth held in place by understanding. Over time, people stopped measuring homes by size or output. They measured them by steadiness, by how little panic they produced when conditions turned harsh. The cabin became the quiet benchmark, not because it was famous, but because it was calm when everything else wasn't. Children who never met Elias learned his habits anyway. Open to the sun, close before dark, build tight, build slow, let the land do the heavy lifting. These weren't rules carved into signs. They were behaviors absorbed by watching. The cabin taught without words. The cold never stopped coming, but it stopped being feared the same way. The valley no longer treated winter as something to defeat, only something to prepare for. Fewer fires burned through the night. More homes slept quietly. The change was subtle but permanent. Decades passed. Stories grew larger than the cabin itself. But the building stayed unchanged, uninterested in legend. It didn't need to be proven again. It had already done what it was built to do, year after year. In the end, the cabin stood as a simple answer to a complicated fear. Warmth was not about fire, not about effort, not about constant struggle. It was about understanding where you stood and building accordingly. And in a place where winter once decided everything, one quiet cabin proved that design could decide just as much. Eventually, the cabin stopped being pointed out. Visitors passed it without comment. It blended into the hillside the way it always had. That was the final proof. What once seemed impossible had become normal. There was never a sign placed near the door. No plaque explaining what had happened there. No dates carved into wood. The cabin didn't need explanation. Anyone who stepped inside understood within seconds. People used to think innovation meant adding something new. The cabin suggested the opposite, that sometimes progress came from removing what wasn't needed. No fire, no fuel, no excess, just intention. Long after tools rusted and materials changed, the principle stayed alive. Build for where you are. Respect limits. Let structure do the work before effort ever begins. The cabin was never the message. The thinking was. Winter still returned every year. Snow still fell. Cold still tested the valley. But it no longer won by surprise. Because once, long ago, a small cabin with no stove and no chimney proved that survival didn't have to be loud to be effective. Sometimes, the strongest answer was silence. The cabin never tried to be remembered. It didn't stand taller with time. It didn't grow additions or collect attention. It remained what it had always been, set into the land, quiet, complete. Winter continued to arrive as it always had. Snow erased roads. Wind tested every weak seam. Cold searched for openings without mercy. And the cabin answered the same way every year, by giving it none. Long after Elias, long after the stories softened into truth, the cabin still held warmth without flame. Not as a miracle, not as a secret, as a consequence of understanding. People who passed it didn't always stop. Those who did rarely spoke. They felt the steadiness in the air and carried it with them when they left. The lesson was never written down. It didn't need to be, because once you understood it, you built differently. You lived differently. You stopped fighting what could be worked with instead. And in a place where winter once decided who stayed and who didn't, one small cabin proved something quietly, permanently true. Warmth isn't made at the moment you need it. It's designed long before the cold arrives.